everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name is Scott Mantz, and I am delighted to be the host of this edition of Half Hour with the Tattooist of Auschwitz. 6-part miniseries is very powerful, streaming now on Peacock. I am very excited to welcome executive producer and producer Claire Mundell to the conversation. Claire, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation about the Tattooist of Auschwitz.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Scott.
So just before we really get into it, just give us a quick overview of what the series is about.
Sure. So The Tattooist of Auschwitz is a 6-part adaptation of the best-selling novel written by Heather Morris, telling the story of, really in his own words, of Lali Sokolov, a Holocaust survivor who was one of the tattooists at Auschwitz. And the most remarkable thing about the Tattooist of Auschwitz is that in this place of hell, where life was so terribly cheap and death surrounded our characters at every turn, Lali Sokolov met the woman who would become not only the love of his life, but in fact his wife and the mother of his only child, Gita. And it's the most extraordinary story of love and hope and survival in a one of the most notorious concentration camps of the Second World War. It's a very peculiar combination of both a very intimate story and a very global story in a sense, I guess, because this territory is well-worn territory, but this particular story, which is Lali's story and very much from his point of view, is I think pretty special, really, because of the nature of the love that they found there in a place that one could imagine you would never find love.
Absolutely. Let's take a look right now at the Tattooist of Auschwitz.
Mr. Sokolov.
Call me Lali.
You're looking for someone to write your life story.
So this is a love story.
Out! Go! Welcome to Auschwitz. Get up! Get dressed!
This is what it was every morning.
The new tattooist. I am now in charge of you.
Tattoo people, it's not something I can do. Every time I open my eyes, I am still there.
You have to find something in your mind. A good thing. You can't get in here.
But I found something there. Someone.
Can you be here?
Thinking about that guy.
What guy?
We must keep living, whatever it takes. Love still exists.
Claire, stories, films, TV shows, documentaries about the Holocaust are well worn, as you said. But when you read this book by Heather Morris, what informed your approach on how to bring this to the screen? And tell us about the first conversations you had with the director of all 6 episodes.
Sure. Well, back in the summer of 2018, when the book first came to my attention, I was very conscious of how ubiquitous the book was becoming. It had already been a bestseller in Australia. It went straight into the UK Sunday Times bestseller list at number 2 or 3, I think, and then stayed there for many, many weeks. And it seemed to be a story that was capturing people's hearts and minds, and all ages, all classes of people, all types of people. And I thought there was something really fascinating in the fact that people were coming to this story. And I was even further intrigued when I did a bit of research at that time and was shocked to discover the lack of Holocaust awareness actually in Europe and also in the US. Amongst 16 to 24-year-olds, it was a very shocking number, something around just under 50%, in fact. And I couldn't compute these two things. And so we read the book, we made contact with Heather Morris, and we began to understand something of the nature of why it was capturing people's attention, because it is such an incredible story. Lali's story is so inspiring for two young people in the situation they were in to find it within themselves to, resist the dehumanization that was being meted out upon them by falling in love, by connecting with their hearts, which in a situation such as theirs, it is sort of an act of defiance, really. I think the one thing that, couldn't be taken from them was literally their hearts. And that blew me away. We began the process of speaking to Heather, speaking to our top creative team, my fellow exec producer, Jacqueline Persky, who is also the lead writer on the show, is a wonderful writer and someone that, I work with regularly. And we sent the book to Jacqueline. We spoke about, with our story producer, Ruth Underwood, myself and Jacqueline spoke about, does the world need another project in this genre? Because there's so much incredible work out there. And if we're going to take this on, we need a very distinctive approach to it. And within the book, there's an epilogue where Heather Morris talks about the first time she ever met Lali. And, she was a woman in her early 50s. She was a natural storyteller, but she'd never written anything. She was, as we depict so wonderfully, I think, via the amazing Melanie Lynskey, the sort of naivety and the sort of novice nature of Heather at that time. She was a woman with a big heart and who was known for being a great listener, and she was willing to spend time with this elderly man, a friend of hers, in her place of work, which at that time was a hospital in Melbourne in the social work department, asked her to go and meet this old man who had recently lost his wife, and he was grieving and he was lonely, and he said he had a story to tell. And Heather was kind enough to give a few hours and sit with him. And that seemed to us to be such an intriguing way into the story, because we take for granted that survivors of the Holocaust are with us. And as the years progress, obviously fewer and fewer survive. And sadly, in a few years, there will be no survivors left. And here was a way to perhaps frame the story by depicting elderly Lali and allow us to show his trauma as an elderly man and use that as a way to literally go into his memories and see the story in the past. So we knew very early on what our approach would be, and Jacqueline was very passionate about that, and it was a stroke of genius, I think, and that really was our first pitch to Heather Morris.
So talk about responsibility. Talk about a daunting prospect of mounting a series like this. With your body of work, what was the biggest challenge for you when you really got going?
Everything about this project was challenging, rightly. I think from the very beginning, we were conscious of the fact that we were taking on something which is actually impossible. It's impossible to dramatize or recreate Auschwitz. That's a singular experience which, defies representation on screen. And we were aware of the sort of meta nature of that. But what we can do as storytellers and dramatists is we can move people, we can hopefully inspire people and try to take a mainstream audience into this story. We noticed that the book was becoming a phenomenon. shortly after its release in the US, it went straight into the New York Times bestseller list. And today it's sold well over 13 million copies. We understand that with the TV adaptation, the book sales will probably increase by a further 60%. Wow. So millions of people around the world have read this book. And for us, the opportunity to tell one man's story, one survivor's story, and it is just that, it's one story, but in doing that, we hope to honour as many memories as we can. But the great challenge of it was taking this particular show to a mainstream audience and finding within that an appropriate tone. I think tone, Scott, is the biggest challenge in a piece about the Holocaust, and finding what is appropriate. You know, it was a constant conversation from the very beginning, in the writing, in the casting, in the direction of the piece, everything, every single part of this project was about tone. And for some people, the tone will be too dark, and for other people, the tone will be too light. You know, we as program makers had to pick a spot, you know, and but I can honestly say that really took up most of our conversations, mine and Tally's, our conversations with the network, with Jacqueline, you know, and everyone in our crew. The first thing we did when we optioned the novel was we went to Auschwitz and we met with the museum, and that was the first of many visits. I think I've been 6 times now over the course of the development of the project. To take on a project like this is full of responsibility, and we needed everyone to understand this was no ordinary project. You know, this was going to be something that everyone had to approach in the most respectful way. But from every part of the project, all the way to the artwork, the choice of font, the music choices, every single thing was scrutinized. And, you know, I hope that we've managed to walk a line. You know, we have to show as many harrowing scenes as we can possibly put into a TV show, but, you know, our goal is to have an audience stay with the show all the way to the end. Yeah. And so we have to push and pull people. We have to, you know, we have to give some sense of what that dreadful experience must have been like in order to do justice to the love story, you know. And so that is the biggest challenge of a piece like this, you know. And the scale of it, of course, you know, the scale is huge, but tone, I think, is a bigger challenge. Yeah.
Oh, tone is absolutely a challenge, especially something so epic and sweeping as the story and the years that it covers, and jumping back and forth in time. But when it came to casting Lali, you had to cast 2 actors. You had to cast older Lali and younger Lali. So for older Lali, Harvey Keitel, and I would say a career-defining performance, and that's a lot. And then younger Lali, played by Jonah Hauer-King. So you got to find the 2 right actors, and 2 right actors who are going to complement each other to the way that, like, you don't want to be like, oh, this guy would never be this guy. So did you find these 2 guys, and what were those conversations with them like?
I wanted to have 2 actors with lived Jewish experience. I think that's really important. And Jonah, I had been following for some time. I think he's a wonderful young up-and-coming British actor. He's thoughtful, kind, intelligent, really super instinctive. And we actually brought Jonah onto the project before we even found the director, because I didn't want to lose him. I wanted him to know that we were out there and that we really wanted him. So he actually joined the project about a year before he started filming. He was really deeply embedded in the show and so committed. He did so much work on his character in advance. We had a long lunch together, he and I, where he thought he was coming to pitch himself to me, and I thought I was pitching to him. And we basically, well, I mean, it was about a 5-hour lunch, I think, because we didn't really know each other, but we, you know, neither of us wanted to give up on the pitch until I finally said to him, I don't think you need to pitch anymore. Like, you've got it. If you want it, you know, it's yours. It was always yours. So he came on board, and he's really been a wonderful creative collaborator on it. And he is the most unique number 1 on the call sheet, because he's so kind and he sets a tone. And he was very helpful in setting that respectful tone on set as well for everyone, and being a real leader, a real creative leader. And then for elderly Lali, Harvey was the only person we offered to, and he was number one. I mean, he actually, very sweetly at the end of the shoot asked me, he said, "Come on, tell me, who else did you offer to?" I was like, "You," and only you. I think Harvey Keitel is a legend. Obviously, he's an incredible actor. He's a true artist. I mean, he really, really is. He, was bringing us stuff on set. In every take, he wanted to push his performance. He wanted to try different, responses to the scene. Tali Shalom Ezer, our wonderful director, who directed all 6 episodes.
Yeah.
She had a very special relationship with Harvey. And, these scenes, many of these scenes that he is, he's dramatizing, they're incredibly traumatizing. And the memories that he has to depict of this real man, of Lali, they're really, they're upsetting, they're troubling things to consider. And Harvey was so committed to that depiction. He spent hours watching footage of the real Lali Sokolov.
Oh.
And he spoke, to members of the family, and really wanted to honor his memory. But it's a real inhabiting of the character. I think it's the best work I've ever seen of Harvey Keitel's, and as you say, I mean, that is saying something, because here's a man whose career is is off the charts. I think that I really, really hope people recognize Harvey's contribution to this, because it's so wonderful. When he came on set, the first day he came on set, you could not hear a pin drop. I mean, the crew were spellbound, and rightly so, because Harvey was completely 100% in that character and in that experience.
Well, let's take a look now at a scene from The Tattooist of Auschwitz.
I needed to keep him happy, you understand. He now knew who she was.
He knew she was. He knew which little bed was hers. He could visit her whenever he wanted to.
Let's leave this. Okay, why don't you go sit down? Lali, I'll bring you some water.
Yes. He gave it to her.
Sorry, I didn't.
I didn't know what he could have done to her. Just a minute, sorry.
Jesus.
Like more than 20 years been a fan of hers, but like recently, with The Last of Us and The Yellow Jackets, and now this, she has just been delivering one superb performance after another. How was that conversation with her about playing Heather Morris?
Oh, I mean, Melanie is incredible in the show. I think that she, Melanie can do so much so subtly with so, little, and she listens. That is really the principal thing, I suppose, that Heather Morris did with all that time that she spent with Lali Sokolov. She took this memory, that this elderly man had, much of which was fractured and came out in all different orders, but she had huge compassion and she listened. And I think Melanie portrays the kind of open-hearted nature of Heather Morris, and the sort of naive novice writer element of her so beautifully. I mean, Melanie, in her portrayal of of Heather for me is an access point for the audience. You know, she is us. She is there to witness what this man is saying, and she's there to take us into his experience. I think for her to be able to give the performance that she does, which is so moving and so heartfelt, and to work around this fractured narrative when this old man is seeing ghosts here and he's distracted there, and you know, she's incredible. Again, I feel like we got so lucky on this project because Melanie was our #1 choice. She is also a Kiwi, and it was important to us to try to cast, as I say, as authentically as possible. I really feel like she just, her portrayal of Heather, you know, which is difficult to do. It's difficult to portray someone who is, you know, still alive, a real person who is with us.
Yeah.
But her portrayal of that character is so unique. It's her version of that character, and she completely owns it. And she brings us to the story with such grace and such emotion. So yeah, it was amazing. And it was amazing to watch her process on set because, you know, she has been at the top of her game forever, really, it seems. I mean, she was just like constantly, her instincts were constantly right and beautiful, and yeah, real pleasure to work with her.
All right. So when I was watching the series, I was like, wow, how did they film at Auschwitz? And then I did my homework. You
Yeah.
did film at Auschwitz. You recreated. How did you do that? And cast, I would say, hundreds of background actors to make it feel authentic.
We had 5,000 extras across the shooting period. We shot for 84 days. We created a section of Birkenau in a field outside Bratislava in Slovakia. If you've been to Auschwitz yourself, you will know that it's a huge camp. I think probably impossible to build on a replica scale because there would literally be nothing in the lens, in the viewpoint of the lens, because the distances are so vast. So what you see is a combination of practical design in the foreground and visual effects in the background. And we brought our visual effects and our production teams together, our production design teams, which apparently is quite an unusual thing. Very often the visual effects teams don't get to meet the physical design teams. But for us, we felt it was important that these two departments were completely combined from the very beginning, so that they could work very closely. And Stevie Herbert, our designer, Alan Church, our visual effects producer, and David Katz-Nelson, our director of photography, really worked like a triumvirate in order to make that set extend so beautifully. And the way that the camera department and visual effects and production design worked together was really unique on this project, and I really hope they get recognised for their work because it's incredible. And I'm really thrilled to hear you say you thought we had filmed there, because that was the goal. We had to build some version of it that would work for the story. And we also built, of course, the Auschwitz gate. That was a separate set, which again we extended through green screen and visual effects. So yeah, incredible work.
You know, the last question I really have for you is, so the series dropped on Peacock in March.
Yeah.
You know, for decades, the message after the Holocaust was never forget.
Yeah.
And at the top of this conversation, you had an alarming figure, how many people not only forgot, but didn't even know.
Yeah.
So what do you hope above all else in this day and age where anti-Semitism in particular is certainly at an all-time high from my lifetime, take away from the Tattooist of Auschwitz?
I hope that audiences around the world of all faiths, all ages, all classes, all types, all creeds are reminded of our human capacity to love, to choose love over hate, and that it inspires people, that Lali's story, Lali and Gita's story, as I say, just one story, inspires people to go further in their own journey of understanding what happened there and why it must never happen again, you know. And I think it's one of the great bonuses, I think, of and one of the great gifts of our project is that we were all committed in that goal as program makers. You know, very often we make drama that is enjoyable but forgettable, and none of us wanted this show to be forgettable. We all joined forces really so closely as a team to do justice to Lali and Gita's story. And actually, you know, their son, Gary, is a huge fan of the show. We screened the whole show to Gary in February back in Melbourne. You know, he said at one point in a very emotional screening, he said, "You've given me back my parents." And, you know, I many of these stories, you know, are stories that we just have to keep telling. So I think that's my biggest hope, is that a big mainstream audience with a readership and a viewership like the book that is not necessarily what you always expect will cut through. I hope that to Jewish audiences it feels respectful, because we tried our best. We put a lot of love and attention into that, and our wonderful director Tali Shalom Ezer is a Jewish Israeli director who, you know, really poured her heart and soul into this project, as the rest of us did, and all of our Jewish cast and crew, in fact, of which there are many in the project. I think that's the thing I hope, really, because I think popular drama has the power to really move hearts and minds, and we should try to use it in ways that you know, can make the world a better place, if that is possible, I think.
Well, that is certainly a reason for the show to be seen. But for everyone watching who may have already seen The Tattooist of Auschwitz, you know, I'm a firm believer that certain things, you watch them again and again, and you get new things out of them. You pick up things maybe you didn't pick up before. Maybe the perspective gives you another framework onto the series. So what do you think that watching The Tattooist of Auschwitz maybe a second time would reveal on another viewing?
Gosh, so many things, Scott. I wish I had more time, but I mean, one thing is the storytelling approach. I think if you watch the show more than once, you see the nuance of what we're doing in the way that we depict memory and trauma. It's a hallmark of the show that we show Lali's memory, the memory he is prepared to share with Heather, and then when Heather is not there, he shares on his own, but also with us. He shares the real memory, or what he can bear to recall. And as the series progresses, that becomes more and more developed, until we understand that this man has been carrying this misplaced shame on his shoulders all of his life. And in fact, what he is doing with Heather is he's in therapy. He's unburdening himself of this terrible guilt and shame in order that he can be with his wife. The other thing, Scott, that I would say is a real hallmark of the show from a stylistic point of view is the way in which we break the fourth wall every now and then, and we are haunted just as Lali is haunted by the faces of the people who didn't make it. You know, as an elderly man, Lali, just like the real Lali Sokolov, is haunted by all the other people who did not survive. And, you know, his survivor guilt, because he was a tattooist, which made him effectively an employee of the SS, is very complex. So when these people of all ages, children, elderly people, disabled people, stare down the lens, they're staring at him in his memory, but they're also staring at us in the audience. And we felt that was a really important stylistic choice. It was Tali's choice as director, and I think it's wonderful, because I feel like it's a bit of a challenge in a way. Some of those people are pleading with us, some of those people are challenging us. It's a chance, I think, for a contemporary audience to remember that although they are watching a drama, that, you know, these faces are based on the memories of people who didn't make it. And I really want the audience to remember that as they watch it, so that they understand the gravity, I guess, of the story that we're trying to honor.
That is absolutely right on point. I want to thank you, Claire, for being a part of this conversation. Big thanks to our friends at Peacock for making this conversation possible. Once again, The Tattooist of Auschwitz is streaming all 6 episodes of this powerful and extraordinary miniseries on Peacock. Claire, thank you for joining us for this conversation.